Hello and welcome to my channel. Please subscribe, share and like our videos. In the small villages of Aboh and Asaba, two rivers flowed side by side. The villagers depended on these rivers for drinking water, irrigation, and transportation. The river in Aboh village was called Oramiriukwa, which meant great provider in the local Igbo language. It started as a small spring in the mountains to the north before flowing for many miles through forests and plains. By the time it reached Aboh, it was wide and deep enough for small boats to travel on. The river brought life and prosperity to the village. Women gathered at its banks each day to collect water and wash clothes. Fishermen cast their nets and returned with bountiful catches of tilapia and catfish. Farms flourished on its nutrient-rich banks. The river connected Aboh to other towns where they could trade and sell their goods. For generations, Oramiriukwa had sustained the people of Aboh. Meanwhile, the river in Asaba was called Oshimili, or the Great Water, in Igbo. It too began as a small spring but snaked southward, gaining strength until it converged with Oramiriukwa at the border between the two villages. The people of Asaba likewise depended on Oshimili for survival. They fished its waters, channeling some of it into hand-dug irrigation canals for their yam and cassava farms. The river enabled them to travel and trade up and down the banks. It provided water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Oshimili was the lifeblood of Asaba. The two rivers flowed parallel for over a mile, so close that children from each village could wave to each other across the narrow divide. But the rivers never mixed. The villagers found it curious how the murky brown waters of Oramiriukwa and the clear blue waters of Oshimili remained distinct even when just yards apart. It seemed to symbolize the relationship between the two villages, side by side yet separate. While no one could recall a time when the rivers ever mingled, the villagers still sensed an invisible bond between them. When Oramiriukwa flooded its banks, Oshimili would soon follow. In times of drought, both rivers shrank together. The rivers rose and fell in unison, even if their waters never met. Occasionally, someone from Aboh or Asaba would attempt to cross the narrow divide. But whether by raft, canoe, or swimming, none succeeded. The rivers carried them back to their own side without fail. Crossing was taboo. The elders said it was because their gods inhabited the sacred waters and wished the villages to remain distinct. Attempting to mix them could bring a curse upon both communities. So the two villages coexisted, cooperated when necessary, but otherwise kept to themselves. Whenever dispute arose over fishing rights or farmland, the elders and chiefs would meet on the shore and work it out. They shared knowledge of medicines, crops, and hunting between them. But the rivers, like the villages, were unmixed. This remained so for centuries, even as kings rose and fell, and the new religion of Christianity began to spread through the region. It seemed the rivers would always flow side by side, never converging no matter how narrowly they flowed past each other. Then the white colonists from Britain arrived. They were newcomers who did not honor the old ways nor respect the spirits of the rivers. They dreamed of exploiting the land's riches and bending nature to their will. The British settlers forced the people of Aboh and Asaba to work for them, often as slave labor. They overfished the rivers and chopped down the sacred forests to erect their churches, trading posts, and colonial offices. They also built a large boat port in Asaba where the ships carried away palm oil, rubber, and other local resources to feed industries overseas. But perhaps the worst offense came when the British colonial governor decided to dig an irrigation canal directly linking Oramiriukwa with Oshimili. When the elders learned of the plan, they protested vehemently. "This is sacred ground you tread on," the chief of Aboh pleaded with the British governor one sweltering afternoon. "Our gods forbid the two rivers to meet." "Your gods have no say any longer," scoffed the British governor, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "We represent progress. The canal will increase crop yields and facilitate travel. It is for the benefit of you all." The elders argued, but the governor would not be swayed. Soon the British set hundreds of locals to work digging the canal under threat of punishment. It was back-breaking labor in the tropical heat. Many who got sick digging the canal perished from strange fevers. But the British whipped and beat the villagers to continue on. Finally, the canal was completed. Where once a thin strip of land kept the two rivers apart, now a straight artificial channel linked them. It sliced through the holy ground like a fresh scar across the land. As the last bit of earth was dug away, the villagers looked on with dread. The British governor wore a proud smile. "Behold, we have tamed even the gods and elements with our modern engineering. Now these rivers shall be made one." But as the murky brown water from Oramiriukwa began to flow into the clear blue of Oshimili, a rumble sounded from the depths. The rivers churned and roiled, rejecting the unnatural mixing. Dark clouds gathered overhead and a torrential rain burst forth. as if the sky itself was protesting the deed. Before the governor's eyes, the canal crumbled in on itself, the dirt and clay walls collapsing inward until it was blocked again. The rivers returned to their previous courses, flowing on opposite sides once more. "It seems your gods are stubborn as ever," the governor muttered in disappointment, but the people felt relieved. The taboo against mixing the rivers had held firm. News of the incident spread throughout the region. In other villages, it fueled resistance against British domination and efforts to subdue their lands. The canal became a symbol of unwelcome outsiders trying to displace ancient cultures and traditions. But the British would not accept defeat so easily. If a canal did not succeed, the governor turned to an even more audacious plan. He commissioned the construction of a railroad bridge to span the two rivers. It would allow trains to travel between Asaba and the rest of the colonized area. The massive stone bridge took years to complete under forced native labor. All the while the locals murmured prayers and made offerings to the river gods to intervene. But the stubborn British were not deterred. When the mammoth bridge finally linked the shores over the spot where the rivers converged, the governor's engineers ran the first steam locomotive across. The train's whistle echoed as it rumbled ahead where no one had managed to cross before. But as it reached the middle of the bridge, an ear-splitting crack rang out. Before the train could make it all the way across, the entire bridge crumbled beneath it into the swirling rivers below with an enormous splash. The locomotive sank into the deep waters, buried along with the prideful notion that the rivers could be joined by such intrusions. Some of the British were superstitious enough to take it as a sign from the native gods. But the governor angrily ordered the bridge rebuilt again. This time it took even longer, as most of the local laborers had fled into the forests to escape the oppressive colonizers. But eventually, using heavy machines and modern engineering techniques, a new sturdier bridge again spanned the rivers. Steel rather than stone this time. When the next train steamed across, whistles tooting, the rivers remained calm. The bridge held firm and fast. The train was able to complete its journey over the bridge and along to Asaba. For a time after, the governor made all the villagers come watch the trains cross the bridge, taunting them with the success of British progress and ingenuity. But the Africans were patient. They knew the spirits of the rivers would respond in their own time. And sure enough, only a few months later in the peak of rainy season, the rivers swelled higher than ever known before. Upriver dams and blockages formed natural barriers, causing the rivers to pool and rise up. The deluge overwhelmed the bridge supports, still relatively new and untested. Under the massive pressure, first the central spans buckled and collapsed, then the entire bridge groaned and twisted apart, tossed about like a toy in the churning flood waters. The governor watched in dismay from shore as the second bridge catastrophically failed, brick by brick plunging into the raging currents. The rivers themselves had finally answered back resoundingly. This time, no effort was made to rebuild. The British quietly abandoned their efforts to bridge the rivers. In time, they retreated from the region entirely. The people traded their colonizers for new national leaders, but kept their sovereignty from distant powers thereafter. And the two rivers continued flowing as they always had, side by side but unmixed, just as the elders had insisted all along based on the wisdom of their forebearers. Their gods were proven right. The taboo held. Nowadays motorists still have to drive over an hour out of the way to cross between the villages because never again was a bridge erected over the conjoining rivers. Occasionally old trees or debris get momentarily stuck where the rivers meet, but quickly wash apart again. The rivers allow nothing to infringe on their sacred separation. On mornings when the mist is still rising, village children sometimes wander to the banks with old fishermen casting their nets. They peer across at the shadowy figures on the far shore doing the same. The sounds of splashing, chatting, and laughter carry in the moist air. For a brief, quiet moment, there is a sense that we are all connected, by the rivers, the land, and generations who once shared the same stories. Two villages and two rivers, touching but unmixed, going on side by side from now until forevermore.